Hello again. One of the most notable features of every sub-Saharan African country is that despite being blessed on the whole with abundant useful minerals, as well as oil and other resources, none of them seem able to take advantage of these things without assistance from Europe, China or America. The whole world cries out for the rare elements found in Central Africa. They make our mobile telephones and electric cars possible. Yet the Africans themselves are unable or unwilling to exploit their potential. Even odder is the fact that the more richly endowed in mineral wealth of such countries, the poorer are their citizens and the more violence and bloodshed they seem to experience. Turning now to Britain and the United States, we observe that campaigns for social justice are always centred not around people of Asian or European origin, but exclusively concern themselves with those whose families have their roots in Africa. Whenever we are told that BAME students are failing to get to Oxford or Harvard, we know perfectly well that this does not refer generally to black and minority ethnic groups at all. Those of Indian or Chinese heritage are not struggling to get into the best universities. BAME is code for Black African origin. It is black people who are falling behind in Western societies, not Arabs, Indians, Jews or Chinese people. Could there be a connection between the chronic inability of African nations to thrive and the fact that black people in Europe and America, whether school children or adults, always seem to need extra help and support from white society to fulfil their potential? In Britain, it is necessary to lower the required grades for certain university courses if the number of black students is to be increased. In America, the same thing is done at both Harvard and Yale to ensure what is known as racial balancing. The reason is simple. In Britain, students from families of Chinese origin are 5 times more likely to gain 3 A levels at grade A than are black students. The same thing is seen in America. Without the support of white admission staff to rig the deck in their favour, black students would not be getting into Harvard or Yale. The same thing has and is being seen in Africa. When white people were giving extensive help, countries like Rhodesia, Nigeria and South Africa did very well indeed. They prospered. When that help was withdrawn after independence, the countries floundered and relapsed into bloodshed and chaos. One thing which might go some way to explaining both these things is the fact that from a very early age, children of African origin appear to be less willing or able to defer gratification. That is to say, if offered the chance of 1 sweet immediately, or 3 in an hour's time, black children take the sweet which they can have at once far more often than white children do. This is the case when research has been carried out in Africa, America and Britain. It just seems to be one of those things. In teenagers, the same thing has been observed, that black adolescents will take something which is available right now instead of being prepared to wait for a greater reward in a few days or weeks. I've mentioned some of this research in the past. For example, when black and white teenagers were offered a gift of a gramophone record at once, or 3 if they waited a few weeks, the white teenagers would nearly always wait for a few weeks to get the greater reward, whereas the black teenagers would usually choose an immediate gramophone record. They would rather take the thing that was offered at once than wait a few weeks for a bigger reward. I do not speculate whether this is some inherent characteristic or something conditioned by society, merely observing that it does seem to be the case. Looking now at the case of Rhodesia and South Africa, we see that both countries were doing brilliantly when white people arranged for the management of resources and, in particular, planning ahead. This is very important for a healthy economy, being aware that the money which you hold in reserve might be needed next year or even in 5 years' time. You cannot simply spend all that you have in your treasury just because it is there. In the same way, thinking now of South Africa, there was a perfectly good electricity system there under white rule, the best in Africa. This is now falling apart with frequent power cuts, and it's getting worse by the day. The infrastructure of a power grid requires careful investment and forward planning. You must think not just of present demand, but ask what demand will be like in 5 or 10 years. Unless you do so, you're going to run out of capacity. Investment will need to be planned, and also a budget for maintenance of existing lines must be accounted for. None of this has been done since majority rule began in South Africa, and the result is that mains electricity in the country is deteriorating rapidly, and it will soon be at the same level as some of the poorer African countries. A reluctance to plan for the future and to spend any resources right now rather than carefully husbanding them could account for this. It too would be an aspect of an inability to defer gratification. Working hard at school and doing your homework in the evening instead of hanging out with your mates is another way of deferring gratification. Students of Chinese origin get the vital school grades needed to get into Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard and Yale because they put in the work as teenagers with a long-term goal in mind. They give up pleasure in the present for a greater reward in the future. This could explain why in Britain 25% of A-level students of Chinese heritage gain 3 A's and are so eligible for the best universities, but only 5.5% of black students do so. On this reading of the case, racism has nothing to do with it, and neither in fact has intelligence. I do not say that this is a full and sufficient explanation for what we see in the world, but I think it might go some way to explaining what we are currently witnessing in Africa as well as in Europe and America.